Good evening and welcome to Resource PNG. Glad you could join us. On tonight's program, we take you to the site at Kikori for a groundbreaking ceremony for a banking facility, followed by an interview with the European Union, Ambassador Martin Dim, and also the US Ambassador Teddy Taylor, and followed by BMT WBM. First up, here's the groundbreaking ceremony that took place in Kikori for a banking facility. An initiative as part of its projects in helping the local landowners manage their finances well, the Mineral Resource Development Company has taken another huge step in financing a project that will benefit the lives of many.
A colourful collage of different ethnic groups within the Southern Highlands and Gulf Province, all here to officiate the official groundbreaking ceremony of a banking facility for the first time here in Kikori Station, Gulf Province, an initiative of MRDC to assist landowner communities within the PNG LNG project.
The groundbreaking ceremony saw many people from the Southern Highlands and the Gulf Provinces travel to witness the occasion. It was celebrated traditionally with colorful headdresses and a variety of traditional dancing. Present for the groundbreaking ceremony were the Managing Director, Mr. Augustine Mano, and his team from MRDC, the Governor of Gulf Province, Honorable Havilakavo, and the Chairman of PRK, Mr. Abraham. They were given a traditional welcome. After an hour of watching the celebration, the locals gathered in front of the grandstand to hear what was to be said by Mr. Mano, the Governor Havilakavo, and PRK Chairman Abraham.
Lohia, last 9 months ago, you may have said Kikoria. Work play marriage in government. Mibla can provide him services. Work play Mibla. Look at him interest play you long. Oil na gas project. Number one. Number one work play me long growing investment long. Or company you block at longan. Service work block government. That's all. Over the last 4 years, Mr. Awesome. Head plong MRDC, he got need. This people need him awesome. People can pay him dividends. People can give him money. That's all. No got change. The way of man meri staba. You missed up awesome before, yeah. Amas yes. Kutubu sa pay him dividend. People kisi. People keke. Kikori town is staba awesome, ma. Oh, kutubu one map this lagan. So now focus blow. People lo MRDC. One of them can help you make a current service go where you got need, where government is not able to go, and me blah working. Now you know I'm expecting more some big plus something government by working longer now. Me talk longer more lick something where you got need where is enough long scale block company la working longer. And this blah me blah last 1 week me dedicated. Me talk thank you you blah get a dancing group. All community leaders, community people, this is something we have to put our hands together, support, put public services. You have to come also. This is not a land or nothing. Bank, not giving service, not land on us, something land on us, and by saving everybody, surrounding communities, public servants in Kikori, in Paimuru, and we'll also save our brothers up at Sembregi. And Kikori Bank and by come up, one good service and by providing the community and the people.
Despite the Mineral Resource Development Company's good intentions and efforts to the people, the onus is on the locals to make sure bankers and clients alike conduct their business securely. Even though the groundbreaking ceremony has taken place, it hasn't been confirmed which banks will be setting up in Kikori. Thank you to MRDC for making it possible to cover this story. Stay tuned for more Resource PNG right after this break. Welcome back. You're watching Resource PNG. This next interview, we join the ambassador for the European Union who have helped with infrastructure and development of the country. Without any further ado, let's join the ambassador, His Excellency Martin Deem.
Hello, Ambassador, and thank you for joining us on the show. Please tell us, what are the relations that exist between the European Union and PNG?
Well, the EU is a group of 27 countries in Europe, and it counts, for example, the United Kingdom, France, Germany, Italy, and many other countries in Europe amongst its members. And our member states, some of our member states have historical linkages with PNG. In the first place, of course, United Kingdom, which has been here historically, and nowadays even shares its head of state with the country of Papua New Guinea. But I myself am from Germany, and Germany has also historical linkages with Papua New Guinea. I found that my family name Deem is a name that is also common here, and there are families in PNG that are called Deem, so I feel nearly having a personal relationship with Papua New Guinea. So there are lots of traditional historical linkages between member states of the European Union and Papua New Guinea. And the European Union, once Papua New Guinea became independent, established very quickly a diplomatic representation here in the country, in Port Moresby. We call it Delegation of the European Union, and all our relations run through this delegation. Our relations are very deep and broad. They range from political discussion on political issues over trade and economic affairs, of course, to a large portfolio of development cooperation which we run here in the country. Just to give you an example, perhaps, on political matters, we discuss frequently human rights issues here with government. In particular, also we discuss on gender equality issues. We discuss positions to be taken by PNG or by the European Union in the United Nations. And we discuss also regional matters with your government. On the economic and trade side, we have a trade agreement with Papua New Guinea. And we work very closely through this agreement in our bilateral trade relations. And we also coordinate positions from time to time when it comes to appearing jointly in Geneva in the World Trade Organization. So we have also a very active and lively relationship on trade. And finally, we have a large development cooperation portfolio here in the country. Currently, it has some 100 million euros, that corresponds to 300 million kina, that we are running here over 5 years in Papua New Guinea. Our main international agreement, which is a framework for us to work with Papua New Guinea, is the so-called Cotonou Agreement, where both the European Union as well as Papua New Guinea are signatories. And in the Cotonou Agreement, you will find all the detailed provisions and clauses that guide us in our relations. Overall, the European Union is here to help, is here to be useful in the framework of our various instruments which we have in our relations with Papua New Guinea. And we look forward to continuing our work as a friend and partner of Papua New Guinea in future.
From your perspective, what challenges and opportunities is PNG's resource sector facing? And are there any French companies involved in this sector?
Well, thanks for this question. It's of course a very relevant question in Papua New Guinea. Currently, the resource sector is booming. It makes Papua New Guinea as a country a booming country. Basically, at the moment, there are large investments that are taking place. We see considerable growth rates. And this, in principle, is of course good. It is good because it provides the opportunity for Papua New Guinea to move into the next stage of its development. It provides opportunities also to move faster on achieving the Millennium Development Goals as they relate, for example, to health or to education. and social indicators, and all of this is a big opportunity. The potential benefits out of this boom, which we see currently in Papua New Guinea, come from the fact that all resource projects create dynamics in the economic fabric. So if a construction site, for example, is being set up, it will require services. There will be training around this construction site to train workers in vocational training to have the right skills to help. There will be demand for services and goods from all over the country. So there is this linkages into the economy. There will be effects that are beneficial for the economy from these projects themselves. And the second big effect is, of course, that once the projects are completed, they get into operation, and then there's an increased flow of funding to different levels of government, be they national, provincial or local, and that helps, of course, then in the coffers of government to fund projects in the right sectors.
Ambassador, we understand that the EU has concluded a trade agreement with PNG. Can you elaborate on this?
This trade agreement is a very important element in our bilateral relationships between the European Union and Papua New Guinea. We in the European Union, we are the largest economic single market in the world with 500 million consumers. We are the largest trading bloc in the world as European Union. We thought that in our relations with developing countries, we should make more use of this fact that we have this power at home, and provide opportunities to conclude trade agreements for developing countries that help their development. So create a second instrument next to our aid through which we could foster sustainable development. Now we have offered this to a group of countries in Africa, in the Caribbean, and to all countries in the Pacific. PNG responded very positively to that. PNG was successful in negotiating and in 2007 concluding a trade agreement with us. This was then signed in 2009. It was ratified by the Parliament of PNG last year in 2011. And we are now in the phase of implementing this agreement. And we had already several meetings on it with PNG. Now, what makes this agreement good for development? Why do we think this is a second instrument next to our aid instrument to help development in PNG? As other trade agreements, this one is also in the first place about the opening of markets, about making the economy more dynamic, increasing competition, lowering prices for consumers, facilitating imports and exports from PNG, and of course also to help PNG place their products better and more in the European market. The main advantage so far from this agreement to the country of PNG has been in the sector of fishery products, where there are particularly favorable conditions built into our trade agreement. There are several thousands of jobs mainly in Leh and Madang, depending on this trade agreement, and we hear of more investment forthcoming in the processing of tuna in Leh and Madang. So we see a lot of dynamics here which has been created through this agreement in PNG. We hear a lot about jobs and income generation through this agreement, and we are very happy that it has been embraced and that it has worked and started to work very well so far. Today we are eager to develop it further, if it's possible, to develop our partnership in the trade arena with PNG further. We could think, for example, of discussing how to expand its coverage, that more exports, not just from the fishery product sector, but also from other important sectors in PNG, such as agriculture, for example, could go successfully to Europe and be placed in our markets. We could also think of expanding the agreement itself, which so far is very much focused on trading goods, but it could also be focusing on trade and services. It could have provisions on investment to foster European Union investment here in the country. And it could have, for example, a development chapter also to make this linkage between the trade side and the development side more explicit and effective. So we are discussing this with government. We plan a big seminar in Port Moresby towards the end of February, where we will talk through these issues with private sector and other actors here in the country.
We'll take a break. When we return, we continue with the interview for the European Union Ambassador, Martin Diem. Thank you for staying with us. We will continue with His Excellency, Martin Diem.
Ambassador, how is the EU viewing the economic growth in PNG, and what is the role of the EU in PNG's resource sector?
We welcome growth generally. We look for growth ourselves in Europe. We welcome growth wherever it occurs in the world because it's generally good for the global economy. It's good for the country where it occurs, in this case for Papua New Guinea. It is good because it provides the opportunity to create jobs and income for a rapidly growing population. So it represents a significant opportunity for Papua New Guinea to move to its next development stage. But to be good in the long term, there need to be some criteria to be fulfilled by this growth, that it can be transformed into lasting development. One such criteria is obviously that it needs to be inclusive growth, that it does not leave out broad segments of the society, but that it takes the whole society and moves it forward in a as far as possible, balanced way. A second criterion is that it should be green, as we call it in Europe. It should be green. That means it should be, as far as possible, carbon dioxide neutral. This is an important topic nowadays, where we all speak about climate change, obviously. It should happen, if it's possible, in a way that there's not much more significant increase of the emission of greenhouse gases. And this can be achieved through the development of green technology, through the deployment of green energy production. Here in PNG, you have abundant resources in this context. Just think of hydro energy, just think of wind and solar energy. But importantly, and perhaps so far not very much in the forefront, but very much existing in PNG, is the opportunity and potential of geothermal energy. We have in Europe a country which is covering its energy needs now 100% out of geothermal energy, and is doing quite well with it, because it is.
Where is this happening?
This is in Iceland. It's in Iceland, and this country is fully decoupled from the price of oil, obviously, which is a benefit in the long term. Now, we have two criteria mentioned so far, which is that it should be inclusive, that growth should be inclusive to be useful, and growth should be green to be useful, but growth should also be with a long-term perspective. Currently, growth in Papua New Guinea is based on and driven very much by investments going on in the resource sector. In the longer term, it is important and useful if the basis for this growth is diversified into other sectors too. Here in Papua New Guinea, obviously the agricultural sector is a very important sector, because the majority of people still live in rural areas where agriculture plays a big role. But then also the manufacturing sector should develop and diversify. And finally, of course, also the services sector is important, and will have to contribute more and more to the overall growth. for it to become more sustainable in the long term. So we have these three criteria: inclusive, green, and diversified for the long term. How can this be fostered, this development towards these three criteria? Well, for the criterion of green growth, one important thing are policies of government in the area of geothermal energy, for example. It is important to have legislation to frame investments, and investors are attracted to countries very much where this frame is existing, and they have the confidence that they know the rules of the game, so to speak. As I said, the potential is huge in Papua New Guinea. I think in the world list of countries that could deploy geothermal energy, it's number 8, since there are lots of volcanoes or hot springs here in this country that are easy to locate and find. And another good move or action to foster inclusive, sustainable growth is, of course, to facilitate the life of private sector through facilitation of procedures applying to it, to investments, to trade and exports or imports. Another useful action is to build infrastructure. Because the growth of private sector and of any sector in the economy is based on having this infrastructure, be they road or harbors or airports. But then it's also important to allow enough competition in the country, that the competitiveness of the companies can grow. And finally, education and health are, as usual, important sectors also to look at in order to have a sustainable growth into the future. The European Union, again, helps with several of these items I mentioned through our aid and political cooperation program. But I should mention that we also have the European Investment Bank, who itself is a facility to help with investment in larger infrastructure programs. And we have also our colleagues from the investment bank here from time to time in the country to discuss these matters and see where they can help from their side with the development of infrastructure in PNG.
Lastly, Ambassador, could you highlight on some of your development and cooperation programs, particularly in rural areas, that are helping improve the lives of Papua New Guineans?
We work, as I already said, through the Cotonou Agreement, basically in Papua New Guinea, to which both the European Union as well as Papua New Guinea are signatories. So the Cotonou Agreement prescribes us basically to look for maximum ownership in the country. So nearly all our cooperation activities are made in very close cooperation with government. So we work very closely through and with the Department for Planning, but also with a series of other important departments according to the sector that we try to cover with our aid. So that is more or less the basis for our development cooperation here in PNG. We implement a portfolio of some 100 million euros, 300 million kinas over 5 years. I would like to take this opportunity to explicitly also mention that these are funds that have been contributed by our 27 member states, which make up the European Union. And obviously 2 important ones are France and the United Kingdom. Both are represented here in Papua New Guinea. And they are, through us, so to speak, a major donor to Papua New Guinea. I would like to highlight one of our flagship programs, which is primary education in PNG. We invest very heavily in this sector because we believe in it. We believe that any development must have as a basis an educated population and workforce. It is important for everybody to go through a solid primary education. We focus our intervention basically on rural areas above all. So we provide scholarship to teachers to be trained and then return to their schools in rural areas. We have over 2011 distributed some 2.5 million school books to all schools in Papua New Guinea. and we have also helped with refurbishing facilities, with refurbishing teacher training colleges and other facilities. We will be continuing this work. And another program I would like to highlight, which is also very much focusing on rural areas, is our water and sanitation project. As you know, water and access to clean water and proper sanitation facilities are in many cases not yet there, but are very important, of immediate importance even to the health of villagers in rural areas, in particular also to the health of mothers and children. So they have a direct impact on achieving development goals. If we improve on access to clean water and sanitation, we have a direct impact on achieving Millennium Development Goals and on improving the livelihood of people living in rural areas in PNG. Now, our program there utilizes very simple technologies, so that once we have completed the installation, the villagers can continue using them and maintaining and repairing them on their own. Our programs come in connection with training, how to use these facilities and how also to embrace a healthy lifestyle. Overall, this package of activities surrounding access to clean waters and sanitation it has been very successful in the villages where we have implemented this. We see a dramatic decrease of cholera cases, while in villages around them you still have them. So we see a need to work more on this, and also again to move forward on this. We look also to others, of course, to accompany us, because needs are big, and in the end our aid is limited. But we will be looking certainly also at this sector when it comes to programming our next tranche of aid over the next 5 years. This will happen this year, and we will give water and sanitation also a serious consideration in our overall planning.
That's good to hear, Ambassador. This brings us to the end of our interview. Thank you so very much for joining us on Resource PNG.
Thank you very much, Antonio.
That was the EU Ambassador, His Excellency Martin Deem. When we return, we will be joined by the US Ambassador, Teddy Taylor. The US Ambassador, His Excellency Teddy Taylor, joins us this evening.
A very good evening to you, Your Excellency. We have today with us His Excellency, the High Commissioner for United States of America. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing fine. Thank you very much. So good to see you.
I'll be your host today for the Resource PNG program, and we will be talking about relations between the United States of America and Papua New Guinea. Sir, would you like to highlight some facts about the bilateral relations of Papua New Guinea and the USA?
Certainly. First of all, I think it's important to keep in mind that we have been with Papua New Guinea as an independent nation since its independence. In fact, we had a consulate here immediately prior to independence. Since that time, our relationship, or our partnership, I'd like to call it, has grown and matured over the past 36 years. Some of the programs that we are engaged in, we are involved in some training of the PNG Defense Force. We are involved with a major initiative that involves some Southeast Asian nations like Indonesia, the Philippines, etc., and PNG, the Coral Triangle Initiative, the nations of the Coral Triangle Sea, in an effort to do what we call ridge to reef conservation efforts to try and stem the impact or mitigate the impact of climate change. Also here, everybody knows that we do some HIV/AIDS work here in the capital and in Madang. Excuse me. We have a very small energy initiative where some of our government geologists are coming to PNG to train members of the extractive industry scientific community here to try and help PNG better prepare itself to handle all of the requests for mining and excavation of or extraction of resources Naturally, we're very proud of our Fulbright program, which is a program for your viewers who may not be aware, where we select a group of Papua New Guineans every year to go to the United States and study. Unlike some of our other friends in the region, the government of the United States does not offer scholarships per se. The Fulbright program is that program by which Papua New Guineans can apply for graduate school programs in the United States. So we have a pretty comprehensive relationship, one that is based on mutual respect and mutual values as democratic nations.
These are some very interesting initiatives which Your Excellency, you highlighted today and summarized them for us. And for the interest of the audience today, I will be asking you about them in a further few details. To start with, something which is very close to us is the biodiversity.
Sure.
The protection of biodiversity, and we understand, as you briefly mentioned just now, that you have an international coral reef initiative. Would you like to demonstrate a little bit more about that?
Sure, happy to. The Coral Triangle Initiative is like a sort of a five-year program to work with the nations of the Coral Sea to help them better manage from the ridge top to the reef. We know that runoff from upstream causes destruction downstream. So it's an effort to try and provide some forestry management best practices, as well as some aquamarine best practices. So the people that depend on I've heard it described as the sea is the garden for Papua New Guinea. And we have to be able to protect the garden so the dwellers around the coastal areas who depend on the waters of not only the Coral Triangle but the other waters surrounding the country will be able to maintain and sustain their lifestyles. So the Coral Triangle Initiative is one initiative geared and specifically geared to the Coral Sea. We had several years ago a small program that was with PNG where we engaged in mangrove reforestation, and that was designed to kind of re-inhabit or reforest the coastline in Moresby with new mangrove seedlings. As people know, the presence of mangroves means that aqua life comes closer to the shore, which means if you are in a village and you have ample mangrove growth, you certainly don't have to row as far or boat as far in order to fish, in order to get the oysters, to get the sea life. So we have a small program in that, and we've hoped now with the presence of USAID here in Port Moresby that we will have a more robust mangrove reforestation program in the coming years. So we're trying to do a few things in the area of climate change to help the residents of PNG either learn to live with the impacts or to try and help mitigate the impact of climate change.
Thank you. That is a very fantastic initiative, and it definitely will help us in recovering the most out of the sea. And as very rightly said by Your Excellencies, that the sea is the garden of Papua New Guinea, and to protect that, and the biodiversity is, the assistance that we are getting from USA is quite beneficial and very much appreciated. And this brings me back to the resource sector, because we are seeing a great economic boom in the resource sector, particularly in gas, mining and oil sector. And we have recently seen a lot of large US corporate giants come in and invest. But looking at the future growth, at the future projects in Papua New Guinea, sir, do you see any more US investors likely to come into the country?
You never say never. I would hope that we would have more US investors in the future come into the country to participate in the economic growth of PNG. I think that as a result of the Exxon project, some of the subcontractors on the Exxon project, once they are here and are undertaking their responsibilities in connection with that project, may begin to look at PNG themselves as a possible place to do business. We certainly want to, we certainly do everything we can on our end as an embassy to encourage U.S. investment, but it takes also government and the business community here to encourage foreign investment in general, U.S. investment specifically.
Thank you, Your Excellency, which makes, when you mention government and PNG officials, I would like to ask you about the program called International Visitor Leadership Program, because this is not very well known to our audience. If you would like to emphasize on that program.
Sure. The International Visitors Leadership Program is a program that we have all over the world, and it's designed to identify individuals in the country where we are posted who have the potential to serve as leaders in their particular sector. We're not talking about just governmental leadership. We're talking about civil society leadership. We're talking about business community leadership. And in addition to that, governmental leadership. It's a program that we have, that's been in practice here since independence. A number of PNG's senior statesmen were members of the IVLP. I should say there are IVLP participants. And we have members of government now who have been IVLP participants in the past. And we continue to try and identify, this is a program that's usually identified for younger people, usually under the age of 40 or so, who still have a lot of professional life ahead of them. And what we do is we send them to Washington, usually with a group of other like-minded or similar individuals in terms of their professional training. They will then have a rigorous 2 or 3 or 4 week program across the United States on a particular subject matter of interest to them. For example, we sent a very dynamic young woman here on a civics project. This project exposed the participants to civil society in the United States, those groups who are engaged in giving back to their communities. They may be running Boys and Girls Clubs. They may be advocating on behalf of disadvantaged teenagers, but in some way they are leaders in how citizens become active participants in the development of the society. And this program, that's what it does. And if you're a government official, we put you in slot you into a government program that's better suited for someone who's currently serving in government. So we send maybe a half dozen or so people a year. It's not we don't make a big deal out of it. It's a very valuable program, a very valuable tool, and for here especially, it provides exposure to the United States for the individual.
Now, very rightly said, Your Excellency, and we agree that development of leadership and via this program of IVLP, which is a very fantastic program, leading to not just leadership in business or leadership in management, but leading to also leadership development in politics, in leadership development in the government and PNG officials. It's a fantastic initiative, and thank you for highlighting more on that for us. I will take you to a different topic now. Sure. Is a little back in history in 2001, looking at the security situation in the country. US peacekeeping force ceased their operations in the country. Do you foresee them coming back in the near future?
We would love to have Peace Corps return tomorrow if it could. As you correctly stated, Peace Corps left in 2001 due to security concerns for the volunteers. Since that time, demand for Peace Corps has probably increased 3 or 4 times since the Peace Corps' unfortunate removal in 2001. We are committed to trying to return the Peace Corps here. We just cannot, with any assuredness, provide a fixed timeline for that return. Naturally, one of the overriding concerns will be for the safety of the volunteers. We are working with Peace Corps to try and allay those fears, to work with our colleagues in Peace Corps to get them to understand that parts of PNG are perfectly safe for volunteers. For example, out in the New Guinea Islands, we could easily have volunteers. But it's a complex process, and the Peace Corps is independent of the Department of State, and they have their own leadership. They have their own committees in our Congress that they respond to, and they have that oversight requirement just like we do in the State Department. Whenever we're going to set up a new embassy or open a new office, we have to convince Congress that it's the right thing to do, and Peace Corps will have to convince Congress that it's the right thing to do here. So we're some time away from getting the Peace Corps here, but we always keep talking with Peace Corps about returning volunteers to PNG.
Excellent. Thank you. Your initiatives or your good intentions or objectives in getting the the Peace Corps here would definitely we should be seeing something happening in the near future. But what we are seeing happening now is a lot of US aid contribution. What we are seeing on the media, on the roads lately is that US aid is helping towards HIV aid, they're helping towards economic growth and sustainable forestry, they're helping towards, as you mentioned in the beginning of the program, about the Coral Reef, Coral Triangle Initiative. Could you highlight a little more about the US aid program? Well,
we opened a regional office for the Pacific of USAID here in October of last year. That office is responsible for the entire Pacific, and their programming will be mostly in the area of climate change. PNG will specifically have a health program because of the HIV AIDS program that we have, and they will also be engaged in other development activities as permitted. And by that I mean we have a lot of donors here who are doing a lot of wonderful things, and our goal is not to replicate what an existing donor agency is currently doing. Our job is to, or our goal I should say, is to enhance or to fill the gaps where perhaps our experiences and set of expertise may be a little greater than some of the other donors, simply because we do this all over the world. But they will focus mainly in the areas of climate change, natural disaster management and mitigation, of course PNG here, health, and then I call them other opportunities or windows of opportunity that may exist. For example, just last week we concluded an ag assessment or agricultural sector assessment here and held a workshop last week, Thursday and Friday. And what will come out of that will be a report for the Department of Agriculture, along with some very achievable recommendations or suggestions for the government in how to better develop the agricultural sector from a business perspective. So that's one of the, what I call windows of opportunity. We worked jointly with our New Zealand colleagues on from New Zealand Aid here locally, and that was a great collaborative effort. And that's the other thing. We will look to collaborate with other donors when and where possible.
Identifying windows of opportunities and assessing the potential of those, right, to implementing them with the help of either US aid or the government of USA. Your Excellency, you have highlighted on very key areas of work or very key areas of initiatives of what the embassy is doing for Papua New Guinea as a bilateral relations in the country from where we started from. And we would sincerely like to thank you for your time and your inputs today.
My pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.
Stay with us as we bring to you BMT right after the break. In a previous Resource PNG show, we featured Chris Nielsen of BMT, where he gave a brief on what BMT as an organization does. Tonight, we have the privilege to bring them back on to inform us in detail the type of jobs they do. British Maritime Technologies, or BMT for short, is an engineering consultancy company based out in the United Kingdom and throughout the world. It has an office in Australia and does consultancy work in Papua New Guinea. The type of business it has deals with heavy machinery which operates in the mines. They look at ways to improve performance and life capacity for the machineries when something goes wrong or fails. For PNG alone, BMT does initial environment work for the government. They help the government to maintain environmental standards in the mines by auditing and monitoring to ensure that operations of the mining industries don't impact the environment in a bad way. The Managing Director of BMT, WBM, Mr. Tony McAllister, speaks about the environment and how it is managed in a PNG resources context.
Protection of the environment in Papua New Guinea is important at a global and a local scale. Globally, it's important because PNG is a hotspot of different plants and animals, and there's new species being discovered on a regular basis. These new species can provide benefits such as cures to disease and, importantly, alternative food crops. PNG also is fortunate enough to support some of the healthiest coral reef ecosystems in the world. To the people of Papua New Guinea, the environment provides important benefits to nature and to themselves, the people. For example, forests can prevent soil erosion, keeping the waterways of the nation free from sediment. Humans can also benefit through the use of natural resources for survival. People living in villages rely on the water drawn from the local rivers for drinking, bathing and other uses, and the plants and animals that live in the forest and oceans for food. We all need clean soils so we can grow our gardens that supply so much of Papua New Guinea's population with their market vegetables. PNG's natural resources can also bring economic gain if they're managed sustainably. Sectors including forestry, fishing, mining and petroleum all rely on PNG's natural resources to both survive, and also everyone, including the government, industries and the communities, need to work together to ensure that these are long-lasting, successful and sustainable industries. PNG's natural resources and environment are protected at the highest level through the National Constitution.
Please stay with us. When we return, we will bring you the second part of our interview with BMT. And welcome back. Let's continue on with BMT. Companies like BMT WBM have a lot to offer with regard to the environment work in the country, doing jobs such as environmental auditing, going around the mine collecting data and inspecting the different ways that the mine operates. They give advice to the companies and also give a report card to the government for the particular mine, where the government can use this data to help the mine improve what it does by reducing the harmful environmental impacts that it makes.
So when the government finally approves a mine to proceed, the mine is then required to be developed, obviously in accordance with the mitigation measures that were proposed or identified in the environmental impact assessment, and to comply with any conditions of approval that may be contained in the environmental permit associated with that project. The conditions of approval may be wide-ranging. They may require the company to manage and prevent erosion from land clearing, to treat any wastewater or discharges that may leave the mine site, to prepare and implement an environmental management plan. The environmental management plan, which may be required, sets out in detail all the strategies that are required to manage and mitigate any of the potential impacts identified by the environmental studies, and it covers aspects including emissions to the air, noise, disposal of solid waste, rainfall runoff and wastewater. An environmental monitoring plan is also required to monitor the aspects of the environment that may be impacted by the mining activities to make sure that all those preceding steps are actually working properly. This may include monitoring of physical attributes such as stream flows, water quality, concentration of metals in common foods such as fish downstream of the mine, and the rates of sedimentation in any streams that are downstream of the mine. Every year, the mining company is required to provide a report to the PNG Department of Environment and Conservation, summarising the results of all of this monitoring I've just talked about and identifying any environmental concerns that may have been identified. In addition, the department conducts regular audits on mining activities to make sure that the mining companies are complying with the environmental laws, the codes of practice and the conditions of their environmental permit and environmental plans.
This ends another amazing show for tonight. Thank you for joining us, and in our next week's edition we feature the following: a story about the landowners where the LNG pipeline is running through, and also an interview with the Malaysian High Commissioner, and also POM-CCI CEO Mr. David Kohn. And for any queries, do email us resourcepng@mtv.com.pg. Until the same time, good night.